At my son's company ceremony, my daughter-in-law handed me a name tag that read, "The old woman who thinks she built this place," and then she smiled as if humiliation was just another item on the evening program. I stood in the marble lobby of the Grand Hartwell Hotel in downtown Columbus, Ohio, holding that little white card between my fingers while music drifted through the ballroom doors and waiters carried trays of sparkling water past me like nothing in the world had shifted. For a moment, I thought I had misread it. At 68, my eyes were not as sharp as they used to be, and the gold lettering was thin beneath the chandelier light. But I looked again. The words were still there. The old woman who thinks she built this place. My name, Margaret Whittaker, had been printed beneath it in smaller letters, almost like an afterthought. 25 years of my life had been reduced to a joke pinned to a navy blue dress. Vanessa was standing beside the registration table in a cream silk pantsuit, her blonde hair swept into a smooth twist, her diamond earrings catching the light every time she tilted her head. She looked expensive, polished, effortless, the kind of woman who knew exactly where every camera was in a room. "Oh, Margaret," she said softly, placing one manicured hand against her chest as if she were surprised by my expression. "Don't look so serious. It's just a joke. Everyone knows you like to feel included." The young receptionist behind the table lowered her eyes. She could not have been more than 22. She looked ashamed for me, and somehow that made it worse. I could feel the heat rising beneath my collar, but I did not give Vanessa the satisfaction of seeing my hands shake. I only reached for the pin, fastened the tag carefully to my jacket, and smoothed the fabric once with my palm. "Then I suppose I should wear it where everyone can read it," I said. Vanessa's smile tightened for half a second. Just half a second. Then it returned, bright and harmless, the way a knife can look harmless when it is lying flat on a table. "That's the spirit," she said. "Daniel is already inside with the investors. Try not to keep him too long if you speak to him. Tonight is very important." Tonight was important. I knew that before I ever stepped out of the cab. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks earlier, thick ivory paper with raised navy lettering, Whittaker Freight Solutions, 25th Anniversary Ceremony. My son Daniel's name was printed as Chief Executive Officer. My late husband Harold's name appeared once, in a small line near the bottom, founded in 1999 by Harold Whittaker. There was no mention of me, but I told myself not to be foolish. Invitations did not tell the whole story. Maybe Daniel wanted to surprise me. Maybe he planned to honor his father properly. Maybe, after 3 years of quiet distance between us, my son remembered that the company had not begun in a boardroom with glass walls and catered lunches. It had begun in our 2-car garage behind a small ranch house outside Dayton, with Harold's old pickup truck, my kitchen calculator, and a folding table that wobbled every time someone set a coffee mug on it. I had dressed for that memory. I wore the navy dress Harold used to say made my silver hair look elegant, and the small pearl brooch he bought me after our first profitable quarter. I had even tucked a short speech into my purse, not because anyone had asked me to speak, but because I had thought foolishly that if there was a moment to say a few words about Harold, I should be ready. I had written it by hand the night before at my kitchen table, while the house sat quiet around me. I wrote about his stubborn kindness, about the winter he drove through a snowstorm to deliver machine parts to a factory in Toledo, about the first employee we hired and how I baked him a chocolate cake because we could not afford a bonus. I wrote about Daniel as a boy, asleep on a stack of moving blankets while Harold and I sorted invoices past midnight. I wrote only 300 words. Just enough to remind people that a company is never built by one pair of hands. But when I looked down at the name tag Vanessa had prepared for me, those words in my purse suddenly felt like something fragile I should protect from the room ahead. The ballroom doors were open now. Inside, round tables were dressed in white linen, each centerpiece arranged with blue hydrangeas and silver candles. A large screen glowed above the stage, showing the company logo Daniel had redesigned after Harold died. The old logo had been simple, Whittaker Freight in block letters, with a small line drawing of a truck Harold sketched himself. The new logo was sleek and cold, all sharp angles and corporate blue. People moved through the room in dark suits and cocktail dresses, laughing softly, lifting glasses, shaking hands. Employees I recognized from years ago stood near the back, older now, thicker around the waist, thinner in the hair. A few saw me and smiled with genuine warmth. One man, Carl Benton, who had worked dispatch for Harold back when we could barely pay overtime, started toward me with his arms opening. Before he reached me, Vanessa stepped smoothly between us. "Carl, there you are," she said, turning him toward a group of guests. "I need you to meet someone from the regional board." Carl glanced over her shoulder at me with an apologetic look, then let himself be guided away. That was how Vanessa worked. Never a shove when a redirect would do. Never a cruel word when a sweet one could cut deeper. I walked farther into the ballroom, aware of the tag on my chest as if it weighed 5 pounds. Some people noticed. Some pretended not to. A woman near the bar read it and gave a quick, uncertain laugh, then looked away when I met her eyes. A young man in a gray suit whispered something to his date. I kept walking. My heels made almost no sound on the carpet. At the front of the room, Daniel stood beneath the stage lights, tall and handsome in the charcoal suit I had helped him choose for Harold's funeral. My son had Harold's shoulders and my eyes, though lately he used them less and less when speaking to me. He was surrounded by investors, city officials, and people with name tags that said things like strategic partner and senior advisor. Vanessa leaned close to him and touched his arm. He looked in my direction then. His eyes dropped to the tag. He saw it. I know he saw it, because his mouth tightened and his face changed in that tiny way only a mother would recognize. For one breath, I waited. I waited for him to cross the room, remove it, apologize, ask who had done such a thing. Instead, Daniel adjusted his cuff link, smiled at the man beside him, and turned back to the conversation. That was the moment the room became clear to me. Vanessa had written the joke, perhaps. But Daniel had allowed it to be worn. I did not cry. I did not leave. I walked to an empty table near the side wall, placed my purse on my lap, and sat with my back straight. The candles flickered in front of me. The music softened. On the big screen, a slideshow began counting down the minutes until the ceremony. Harold's face appeared in one old photograph, standing proudly beside his truck in a faded denim jacket. I touched the pearl brooch at my collar and felt the sharp edge of the name tag beneath it. Then I smiled, not because anything was funny, but because Vanessa had made one mistake that evening. She had invited me into a room full of witnesses. I sat at that side table for several minutes while the room filled around me, and I let myself become very still. Stillness had saved me more times than anyone in that ballroom would ever know. When Harold was alive, people thought he was the strong one because he had the loud laugh, the firm handshake, and the kind of voice that could calm an angry client in under 30 seconds. But Harold used to say my quiet was the foundation under his noise. Margaret sees what everyone else misses, he would tell people, usually after I had caught a wrong number in a shipment order or noticed that a customer was about to leave us before the customer knew it himself. That evening, while Vanessa floated from group to group like she owned the air, I did what I had always done. I watched. I watched Daniel laugh too quickly at jokes from men he wanted to impress. I watched him touch the knot of his tie every time someone mentioned expansion. I watched Vanessa guide conversations away from the past and toward words like growth, modernization, legacy planning, and new leadership. Legacy. That word appeared everywhere, printed on banners, projected on the screen, embossed on the small programs placed at every seat. Yet the people who had lived that legacy were seated near the walls, if they had been invited at all. Carl Benton finally made his way back to me when Vanessa was occupied near the stage. He was 70 now, with silver hair cut close and the same tired kindness in his brown eyes. He bent slightly toward me and said, "Margaret, I am sorry about that tag." His voice was low, almost embarrassed. I looked down as if I had forgotten it was there. Do not be sorry, Carl. You did not print it. His jaw tightened. Harold would have thrown that thing in the trash. The mention of Harold moved through me like a hand pressing against an old bruise. I smiled because the alternative was letting my face show too much. Harold would have asked who approved the guest list first, I said. Then he would have thrown it in the trash. Carl gave a small laugh, but his eyes stayed sad. He pulled out the chair beside me and sat without asking. For a moment, we watched the screen together. It showed photographs from the last 5 years, Daniel cutting ribbons, Daniel shaking hands, Vanessa standing beside him in one elegant outfit after another. There were glossy images of new trucks, renovated offices, charity luncheons, and award dinners. It looked impressive. It looked clean. It looked as if Whitaker Freight Solutions had been born fully grown, without debt, without fear, without 2 exhausted people sitting at a kitchen table at 2 in the morning trying to decide whether to pay the electric bill or repair the transmission on the only truck they had. You should be up there, Carl said. I shook my head slowly. Not yet. He glanced at me, and I could tell he understood enough not to ask. The first speaker stepped onto the stage a few minutes later, a city business official whose name I did not recognize. He praised Daniel for taking a family company and turning it into a regional leader. People applauded. Daniel nodded humbly from the front table, while Vanessa tilted her face toward the applause as though some of it belonged to her. Then the official said something about visionary roots, and for the first time that night, Harold's name echoed through the speakers. Harold Whitaker, he said, began with a dream. A truck and determination. I looked at the stage and waited for the rest. A wife who answered phones from home. A wife who did payroll with a pencil when there was no software. A wife who packed Daniel's school lunches with one hand while calling clients with the other. But the sentence ended there. A dream, a truck, and determination. Clean. Simple. Incomplete. My purse sat in my lap, and inside it was the folded speech I had written. I touched the outside of it through the leather. I could almost see Harold at our old kitchen table, sleeves rolled to his elbows, asking me if I thought we could make it 1 more month. I always said yes before I knew how. Sometimes yes meant stretching a pot roast over 3 dinners. Sometimes it meant wearing the same winter coat for 9 years. Sometimes it meant telling Daniel that his father was a hero while Harold sat in the garage with his head in his hands, wondering whether he had failed us. I never called those years sacrifice. They were marriage. They were family. They were the ordinary bricks of a life built with someone you loved. But watching that polished ceremony, I realized Vanessa had not merely forgotten those bricks. She had built a stage over them and invited everyone to admire the floor. When the official finished, Daniel walked up to speak. The applause was louder this time. He looked handsome under the lights, confident, successful, every inch the man Harold had hoped he would become. For a second, my heart betrayed me and swelled with pride. A mother does not stop being a mother just because her child disappoints her. Daniel thanked the investors, the executive team, the city, and his beautiful wife Vanessa for helping him shape the company into what it was today. Vanessa lowered her eyes modestly, but I saw the smile at the corner of her mouth. Then Daniel said, I also want to acknowledge my father, Harold, who started this company from nothing and taught me that business is about courage. He paused. I leaned forward slightly. The room seemed to hold its breath with me, though of course it did not. And my mother is here tonight, he added, gesturing vaguely toward the side of the room. She was around in those early days too. Around. The word landed softly, but it landed deep. Around, as if I had been a lamp in the room, a chair near the wall, a woman passing through with coffee while men did meaningful things. A few heads turned toward me. Some smiled politely. Someone near the back began clapping, and others followed, uncertain but kind enough. I stood because my body knew manners even when my heart had gone cold. I gave a small nod. The name tag on my chest caught the light. Daniel saw it again. This time he looked away faster. Vanessa did not look away at all. She lifted her glass to me from the front table, her smile smooth, practiced, and victorious. That was when I understood the ceremony was not simply forgetting me. It was teaching the room how to forget me too. After Daniel's speech, dinner service began, and the ballroom shifted into that restless kind of elegance people use when they are trying to enjoy themselves without missing an opportunity to be seen. Plates of herb-roasted chicken and glazed carrots appeared in front of us, though I barely tasted mine. Around me, conversations rose and fell in polished waves. People discussed contracts, warehouse space, fuel prices, college football, and the new office Daniel wanted to open outside Indianapolis. I sat with Carl and two younger managers who treated me with careful politeness, the way people speak to someone they believe has been embarrassed but are not sure whether they are allowed to mention it. One of them, a woman named Lindsay Parker, looked at my name tag 3 times before finally saying, "Mrs. Whitaker, I have heard stories about you from the old dispatch team. They said you used to know every driver by name." I smiled at her. "I still remember most of them." "Routes too," Carl added, pointing his fork gently in my direction. "Back in the day, Margaret could tell you which county road would flood before the weather report did." Lindsay laughed, not mockingly, but with surprise. "Really?" "Oh yes," I said. In March of 2002, if a driver took Route 68 near Wilmington after 2 days of rain, he was going to lose at least 40 minutes. Harold thought I was guessing until I saved him from missing a delivery to Cincinnati. Carl chuckled, and for a few minutes, the table felt warmer. Human. Real. Then Vanessa arrived. She did not approach quickly. She drifted, pausing first at one table, then another, leaving little ripples of perfume and compliments behind her. By the time she reached us, she had gathered 3 guests with her, including a man from one of the investment groups and his wife. Vanessa placed a hand on the back of my chair. Not on my shoulder. Never that intimate. Just close enough to claim control. "Margaret is full of charming old stories," she said. "She loves talking about the days before everything became professional." Carl's smile faded. Lindsay looked down at her plate. I folded my napkin once across my lap and said nothing. The investor's wife, a pleasant woman with soft gray curls, looked genuinely interested. "That must have been quite a time." "It was," I said. "We worked hard." Vanessa gave a light laugh. "Oh, she says we like she was out driving trucks herself." "Margaret, you were mostly keeping Harold fed, were you not? Every man needs a good meal when he is building something big." The sentence was wrapped in sweetness. That was Vanessa's gift. She could insult you in a tone that made other people wonder whether they were rude for noticing. A few people laughed politely because they did not know what else to do. I looked at the butter knife beside my plate, at the way the chandelier reflected in its clean silver surface. Then I looked back at Vanessa. "I did keep Harold fed," I said. "I also kept the books, answered the phones, handled the invoices, called overdue accounts, scheduled local deliveries, and once drove payroll checks 42 miles in a snowstorm because our first 5 employees had families waiting for Friday pay." The table went quiet. Carl nodded slowly. "That was true," he said. "I was one of those 5. Vanessa's fingers tightened on the chair for only a moment. Then she smiled again. Of course, of course. We all appreciate family support." She turned to the investor as if closing a folder. "Margaret has always had a wonderful imagination for detail." That was when I saw what she was doing. She was not just making me look small. She was making my memory seem decorative, unreliable, sentimental. The harmless recollections of an aging mother. I thought of all the times she had done it at Sunday dinners. When I corrected Daniel about the year Harold bought the second truck, Vanessa would say, "Are you sure, Margaret? That was so long ago." When I mentioned a client Harold one because I had stayed up typing the proposal, she would smile and say, "You must have been so proud to watch him do that." Watch. Around. Included. Little words. Soft words. Words that moved me 1 inch away from the truth each time, until one day I was no longer part of the story at all. Before I could answer her, the lights dimmed for the company history video. Vanessa clapped her hands softly. "Oh, perfect timing. You will love this." She moved to the front table beside Daniel, leaving behind the faint scent of jasmine and victory. The screen brightened. Music swelled. The first image appeared, Harold standing beside the original truck, the same photograph I had seen earlier. My throat tightened because I had taken that picture. It was February, cold enough that my fingers had gone numb pressing the camera button. Harold had insisted on standing outside without a coat so the logo on his shirt would show. The next photo showed the first rented office. Then the first warehouse. Then Daniel as a teenager sitting behind Harold's desk, grinning with a telephone receiver in his hand. I remembered that day too. He had been pretending to close $1 million deal, and Harold laughed so hard he had tears in his eyes. The video moved faster. Headlines. Growth charts. New trucks. New uniforms. Ribbon cuttings. Daniel graduating from Ohio State. Daniel joining the company. Harold shaking his hand like a partner instead of a son. Then Harold's retirement dinner. I leaned forward, expecting to see the photo of the three of us beside the cake shaped like a delivery truck. I remembered wearing a green dress. Harold had kissed my cheek in front of everyone and said, "This company has 2 founders, whether the paperwork knows it or not." But that photo did not appear. None of the photos with me appeared. Not one. The screen went from Harold to Daniel, from Daniel to Vanessa, as though I had been edited out of 25 years with the clean click of a mouse. My fork rested untouched beside my plate. The room watched the polished version of my life, and I sat inside the missing pieces. There was no garage, no kitchen table, no folding chairs, no winter coat, no checkbook balanced against grocery money. There was no wife standing in the background of every hard decision. There was only Harold's dream, Daniel's leadership, and Vanessa's elegant arrival to modernize it all. The final slide filled the screen with 3 words, "Honoring our legacy." People applauded. I did not. I looked at Daniel. He was clapping too, his eyes fixed on the screen, his face carefully blank. Vanessa leaned toward him and whispered something that made him nod. In that moment, the name tag stopped hurting me. Pain is sharp when it surprises you. But once you understand its shape, it becomes something else. Evidence. I reached into my purse and touched the folded speech again. Then my fingers brushed against the small sealed envelope I had almost left at home, the one Harold's old attorney, Thomas Green, had mailed me 2 weeks earlier with a note asking me to bring it tonight if I attended. I had not opened it yet. I had told myself it was probably just old paperwork, another detail from a life everyone else had moved beyond. But as the applause continued around me, and Vanessa stood smiling beneath the words "honoring our legacy," I knew old paperwork had a way of waiting patiently until the room was quiet enough to hear it. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. I kept my hand on it while the applause faded, letting my fingers rest against the sealed flap as if I could feel Harold's handwriting through it. Thomas Green had written my name across the front in blue ink, careful and old-fashioned, the way he wrote everything. "Margaret, please bring this with you if you decide to attend the anniversary ceremony." That was all his note had said. I had read that sentence 3 times when it arrived, standing alone at my mailbox in the early evening light. At first, I thought about calling him. Then I thought about throwing it into the kitchen drawer with the insurance forms, tax papers, and other documents that seem to multiply after a husband dies. But something in the word ceremony had made me pause. Thomas had known Harold for 30 years. He was not a dramatic man. He did not waste stamps on sentiment. So I placed the envelope in my purse before leaving the house, telling myself it was only a precaution. Now, sitting beneath a screen that had erased me from my own marriage, I understood that old men who kept careful files sometimes knew more about timing than the rest of us. The program moved on to a panel discussion about the future of Whitaker Freight Solutions. Daniel sat on stage with 2 board members and Vanessa, who had somehow been given the title of brand strategy consultant, though I had never seen her lift anything heavier than a champagne glass at company events. She spoke smoothly about repositioning the company for a new generation. She used phrases like outdated emotional attachments and streamlined leadership culture. Each phrase sounded clean until it reached me. Then I heard what she really meant. Old employees. Old stories. Old mothers. Anything that reminded people of a time before she arrived. A moderator asked Daniel what had been the hardest part of taking over after Harold's passing. Daniel leaned toward the microphone, looked down for a moment, and gave the kind of practiced sigh that belongs in interviews. Losing my father was difficult, he said. But leadership means moving forward, even when some people would rather keep you tied to the past. Some people. I watched his face when he said it. He did not look at me, which told me enough. People around the room nodded with sympathy, hearing wisdom where I heard dismissal. I had become the past in his version of the story. Not his mother. Not Harold's partner in life. Not the woman who had packed his lunch, paid his tuition deposit, sat beside his hospital bed when he had pneumonia at 9 years old, and clapped the loudest when he crossed the stage at graduation. Just the past. Something to respect politely and then move out of the way. I looked down at the dinner plate in front of me. The chicken had gone cold, the sauce forming a pale skin along the edge. I remembered another cold meal, 22 years earlier, when Harold and I had missed our anniversary reservation because a driver broke down near Springfield and Harold had driven out himself with a replacement part. I stayed at the office until after 10, calling the customer every 30 minutes, promising we would not fail them. When Harold finally came home, his hands were black with grease and his face was gray with exhaustion. He found me at the kitchen table with 2 reheated pork chops and a candle burned nearly to the bottom. He looked at me for a long time, then said, "I do not deserve you." I told him not to be foolish and handed him a fork. That was marriage, at least the kind I understood. You did not keep score every time you gave something up. You trusted that the person beside you knew the cost. Harold knew. That was why being erased by Daniel hurt in a different place. A child does not see the whole of his parents' lives. I knew that. Daniel remembered the house, the meals, the birthday cakes, the clean shirts, the rides to practice. He did not remember me sitting with Harold after midnight, deciding whether we could afford dental work for ourselves after paying the drivers. He did not remember me calling 3 banks in one afternoon after our first loan was denied. He did not remember the morning I took my mother's diamond ring from its velvet box and told Harold we could buy it back someday, though both of us knew we probably would not. Daniel was 16 then. He thought the first new truck appeared because business was improving. He did not ask what disappeared so it could arrive. The moderator's voice brought me back. Vanessa was answering a question now, smiling toward the audience. What I admire most about Daniel, she said, is that he was brave enough to step out from under family nostalgia and make this company truly his. Applause followed. Gentle, approving applause. Carl shifted beside me. Under the table, his hand closed into a fist, then opened again. Lindsay Parker stared at the stage with a tight expression, as if she was finally hearing something she did not like. I reached for my water glass and took a slow sip. My mouth was dry, but my hands were steady. It surprised me how steady they were. Perhaps there is a point in humiliation when the heart stops begging to be understood and begins taking inventory instead. I looked around the room and counted what Vanessa had given me without meaning to. A cruel name tag. Witnesses. A public record of Daniel's silence. A video that removed me. A speech that framed me as an obstacle. And in my purse, an unopened envelope from the one man Harold trusted with every serious signature of our lives. Near the stage, Thomas Green finally appeared. He had entered quietly through the side doors, wearing a dark suit that hung a little loose on his thin frame. His hair was white now, and he walked with a black cane, but his eyes were still sharp behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He scanned the room until he found me. When our eyes met, he did not smile. He only gave the smallest nod. Then he looked at the name tag on my chest. Something changed in his face. Not surprise. Confirmation. He made his way around the edge of the ballroom while Vanessa continued talking about modern leadership. When he reached my table, he leaned down carefully and said, "Margaret, did you open the envelope?" I shook my head. Not yet. His gaze moved toward Daniel, then back to me. I think you should. Not here at the table, I said quietly. No, he agreed. Somewhere private. And then, after a pause, he added, before they invite you to speak. I looked at him then. They are not going to invite me to speak. Thomas's expression did not soften. Vanessa just told the event coordinator to prepare a family tribute segment. Your name is on the next card. Carl muttered something under his breath, but I barely heard it. Across the room, Vanessa turned and saw Thomas beside me. For the first time all evening, her smile faltered without returning quickly. That small failure told me more than any confession could have. I picked up my purse, feeling the envelope inside, and stood. The name tag tugged lightly against my jacket as I rose. Thomas offered his arm, not because I needed it, but because he knew dignity sometimes walks better when it is accompanied. Together, we moved toward the hallway outside the ballroom, leaving the applause, the candles, and the polished version of my life behind us. As the doors closed softly at my back, I understood that whatever Harold had left in that envelope, it had waited long enough. The hallway outside the ballroom was quieter, but not silent. Through the closed doors, I could still hear the low murmur of speeches and polite laughter, the soft clink of silverware, the kind of sound that makes public humiliation feel even lonelier because life continues around it so easily. Thomas led me to a small sitting area near the hotel's conference offices, where two leather chairs faced a glass table with a bowl of wrapped mints in the center. The carpet was patterned in blue and gold. The air smelled faintly of furniture polish and lilies from a nearby arrangement. I sat down carefully, not because I felt weak, but because the past 20 minutes had rearranged something inside me, and I wanted both feet on the floor when I opened that envelope. Thomas remained standing for a moment, one hand resting on his cane, his eyes fixed on the ballroom doors behind us. Then he lowered himself into the chair across from me with a quiet breath. Margaret, he said, before you open it, I need to tell you why Harold asked me to hold it. My fingers paused at the flap. Harold asked you? Thomas nodded. The last amendment was signed 8 months before he passed. He was already concerned. About Daniel? About Vanessa, Thomas said. And about Daniel when he was with Vanessa. There was no judgment in his voice, which somehow made the words more serious. Thomas had spent his life measuring language. He did not exaggerate. I looked down at my purse in my lap. The pearl brooch at my collar caught against the name tag, and I reached up to free it. The insulting card bent slightly beneath my fingers. I almost removed it then, but something stopped me. Not yet. Let them see what they had made me wear. Let the room remember it. What did Harold know? I asked. Thomas folded his hands over the top of his cane. He knew Vanessa was encouraging Daniel to consolidate control. That alone would not have troubled him. Daniel was his son, and Harold wanted him to lead someday. But Harold believed leadership without memory becomes entitlement. He was worried you would be pushed aside once he was gone. I gave a small laugh, though there was no humor in it. Pushed aside sounds gentle. Thomas looked at the name tag again. Yes, he said quietly. It does. I opened the envelope. Inside were 3 sheets of paper, neatly folded, along with a copy of an older company agreement I had not seen in years. The first page carried the Whitaker Freight Solutions letterhead from long before the rebrand, back when the logo still looked like Harold's sketch. At the top, in bold letters, were the words Founder Protection Amendment. My eyes moved slowly over the paragraphs. Legal language has a way of making even personal betrayal sound dry and well organized, but I understood enough. Harold had preserved a protected founding share in my name, tied not only to voting rights, but to public representation of the company's origin story. If company leadership attempted to remove, misrepresent, or materially diminish the recognized contribution of a founding spouse during official corporate events, the provision could be activated. I read that sentence twice. Then a third time. Recognized contribution of a founding spouse. My breath caught in a place too deep for tears. Harold had known. Not the details, perhaps. Not this name tag, not Vanessa's polished smile, not Daniel's turned face. But he had known the shape of what might come. He had seen the future standing quietly in the corners before I did. There is also a voting proxy attached, Thomas said. Harold signed it with witnesses. If activated, it allows you to call for an immediate review of executive conduct related to legacy misrepresentation and governance transparency. I looked up at him. Thomas, I worked from a kitchen table. I do not know how to call for an executive review. That is why Harold named me Advisory Founder Emeritus, he said. That title was never honorary, no matter what Daniel chose to tell people. You have standing. My first feeling was not triumph. It was grief. Sharp, clean grief for the man who had sat beside me through so many ordinary nights and quietly protected me from a loneliness he would not be alive to see. I pressed the papers gently against my lap. Harold should have told me. He wanted to, Thomas said. But he also knew you. He knew you would spend your last years with him trying to fix a problem he believed others should have been decent enough not to create. That sentence settled over me like a coat. Heavy, warm, unbearable. From inside the ballroom, applause rose again. Thomas glanced toward the doors. They are moving quickly. The family tribute will be soon. I looked through the glass table at my own shoes, navy heels I had bought on sale 5 years earlier and kept for good occasions. Good occasions. That phrase nearly made me smile. I had spent the entire day believing I was coming to honor Harold. Instead, Harold had come prepared to honor me. What exactly is Vanessa planning? I asked. Thomas hesitated. I spoke with one of the coordinators before I found you. The tribute segment includes a brief interview. Vanessa suggested asking you to share a light memory from the early days. Something domestic, I believe she said. Domestic. I pictured it instantly. Vanessa guiding me toward the stage, placing me under soft lights, asking me about casseroles and coffee while the room laughed gently at the old mother who thought keeping a home was the same as building a company. She wanted to turn me into decoration, one last sentimental ornament before Daniel unveiled whatever future they had planned without me. I folded the papers carefully along their original creases. My hands still did not shake. What happens if I activate this tonight? Thomas studied me. It will not remove Daniel. It will not destroy the company. Harold would not have wanted either. But it will force acknowledgement into the official record. It will freeze certain governance changes until review. And it will require the board to examine whether Daniel and Vanessa knowingly misrepresented founding history for personal positioning. I listened to each word. No fireworks. No shouting. No revenge fit for a cheap movie. Just records, signatures, witnesses, and truth entering a room where lies had grown comfortable. That was Harold's style. Build the bridge correctly, and the weight will reveal what is weak. I placed the papers back in the envelope, but I did not seal it. Then I removed the name tag from my jacket. For a moment, I held it in my palm and read the words again. The old woman who thinks she built this place. Thomas watched me, saying nothing. I pinned it back on, straighter this time. Margaret, he said softly, you do not have to wear that. I know, I replied. That is why I am choosing to. The ballroom doors opened then, and a young coordinator stepped into the hallway, scanning the area with a clipboard in her hands. When she saw me, relief crossed her face. Mrs. Whittaker, there you are. Mrs. Vanessa Whittaker asked me to bring you backstage. We are ready for your tribute moment. I stood, smoothing my dress. Thomas rose beside me, the envelope now tucked beneath my hand like a promise. The coordinator glanced at my name tag and looked away quickly. I followed her toward the ballroom, hearing the audience settle inside. Before we reached the doors, Thomas leaned close and said, Harold trusted your timing. I looked ahead, where Vanessa was waiting near the stage with that perfect smile already prepared. Then I answered, Harold always did. When we stepped back into the ballroom, the room had been softened for sentiment. The lights were lowered, the stage washed in a warm amber glow, and a photograph of Harold filled the screen behind the podium. It was a picture from his later years, taken at a charity breakfast, his hair white at the temples, his smile broad and unguarded. For one foolish second, I wanted to walk toward the screen instead of the stage. I wanted to stand close enough to see the creases at the corners of his eyes and tell him I finally understood why he had worried. But the coordinator guided me toward the side steps, and Vanessa was already there, waiting with a handheld microphone and a face arranged into tenderness. Margaret, she whispered, as if we were close friends sharing a sweet family moment. Just a few light memories, all right? Nothing too technical. People love the human side of these things. I looked at her. Up close, I could see a small line of tension near her mouth, hidden beneath lipstick. Thomas stood several feet behind me, the envelope held against his chest, quiet as a closed door. What kind of memory would you prefer? I asked. Vanessa gave a tiny laugh. Oh, you know, something about making coffee for Harold, maybe packing lunches, keeping him encouraged. Those are important things too. There it was again, that little word that places one life below another without making enough noise to be challenged. Before I could answer, Daniel came over from the front table. His expression was controlled, but his eyes moved once to Thomas, then to the envelope, then back to me. Mom, he said under his breath, Vanessa thought it would be nice if you said a few words. Keep it short, please. We are running behind. I studied my son's face. There were shadows under his eyes. He looked tired, older than 42. For a moment, I saw the boy who used to fall asleep in the passenger seat after baseball practice, cleats muddy, cap pulled low, trusting me to drive him home. Then the image passed, and the man in front of me adjusted his cuff link the way he had earlier when he chose silence over me. I will keep it appropriate, I said. Daniel blinked, as if he did not know whether that should comfort him. The master of ceremonies returned to the podium and smiled at the room. Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue with tonight's final recognition, we wanted to take a moment to hear from someone who was present during the earliest days of Whittaker Freight Solutions. Please welcome Mrs. Margaret Whittaker, Harold's wife and Daniel's mother. Present. Wife. Mother. Not founder. Not partner. Not shareholder. I walked onto the stage anyway. The applause was polite, thinner than the applause Daniel had received, but not unkind. I could feel every eye on the name tag pinned to my jacket. The old woman who thinks she built this place. Some faces changed when they read it from closer range. A few people frowned. Someone in the second row whispered. I did not touch it. I stood at the center of the stage, accepted the microphone from Vanessa, and looked out at the room. From there, everything appeared different. The chandeliers looked lower. The tables looked smaller. Daniel sat in front with his hands clasped. Vanessa remained standing near the steps, smiling up at me with an expression that said she still believed she controlled the frame. Thomas stood beside the wall, waiting. I began softly. Harold would have loved seeing so many people gathered for the company tonight. My voice sounded calm through the speakers. That surprised me, though it should not have. I had spoken to banks, vendors, drivers, teachers, doctors, and one very stern tax examiner during the years when Harold was too busy or too tired to do it himself. A ballroom was only another room. He believed a business was not built from ambition alone, I continued. He believed it was built from promises kept when keeping them was inconvenient. People settled. Forks were placed down. The air changed slightly. I saw Vanessa's smile stiffen. I did not look at her for long. In the beginning, Harold and I ran the company from our garage outside Dayton. The first desk was a folding table with a loose leg. The first file cabinet was a cardboard box from the grocery store. Our first dispatch board was a dry erase board hung beside the washing machine because that was the only wall with enough space. A soft laugh moved through the older employees, not mocking, remembering. Carl Benton smiled at his hands. I went on. Harold drove the truck. I answered the phones. Harold met the clients. I typed the proposals. Harold shook hands. I mailed the invoices, balanced the books, and called customers who were late paying us, because courage is important, but courage does not keep the lights on unless someone also watches the numbers. The room was very quiet now. Daniel was no longer looking at his hands. Vanessa took one step toward the stage, then stopped because people had turned their attention fully to me. I could feel the story returning to its proper shape, not through anger, but through details. Details are difficult to dismiss when they are specific. Our first big contract was with a machine shop in Cincinnati, I said. The proposal was written at my kitchen table after Daniel had gone to bed. Harold wanted to lower the rate because he was afraid of losing the customer. I told him no, because diesel had gone up 12 cents a gallon that week and he had forgotten to include the return mileage. A man near the center of the room laughed with recognition and nodded to the person beside him. I continued. The first time we made payroll without borrowing against our personal account, Harold brought home a grocery store cake and 2 plastic forks. We ate it at midnight in the garage because the office chairs had not arrived yet. I paused and looked toward Harold's photograph on the screen. My throat tightened, but I did not let the feeling spill over. He told me that night, Margaret, this company has 2 hearts. Mine may be louder, but yours keeps the rhythm. No one moved. Even the servers had stopped near the walls. Then Vanessa spoke from the side of the stage, her voice bright and careful. Such sweet memories, Margaret. Thank you for reminding us of the family spirit behind the company. It was an attempt to close the moment before it became something she could not manage. I turned toward her, still holding the microphone. I am not finished, Vanessa. Her name hung in the speakers, clear and even. A few people looked at her. Daniel's face went pale in the stage light. I reached into my purse, removed the folded speech I had written the night before, and set it on the podium without opening it. Then I removed the name tag from my jacket. I held it up between 2 fingers so the front tables could see. I was given this when I arrived tonight, I said. Some guests shifted in their seats. Vanessa's smile disappeared completely. Daniel rose halfway from his chair, then sat again when Thomas stepped forward from the wall. I looked at the card one final time. A joke only works when everyone is laughing, I said. Then I placed it flat on the podium beside my unused speech. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of people understanding something at different speeds. I turned back to the room. For 25 years, I did not ask for credit because I thought love remembered without being reminded. Tonight has taught me that even memory needs a witness. Thomas began walking toward the stage steps, the envelope in his hand. Vanessa stared at him as if the paper itself had betrayed her. Daniel whispered, "Mom, not here." I looked at my son then, not cruelly, not loudly, but with the full weight of every year he had mistaken my restraint for permission. "Yes, Daniel," I said into the microphone. "Here." Thomas did not hurry as he came up the side steps. That was one of the first things I noticed. Everyone else in the room seemed suddenly tense, as if the air had tightened around their shoulders, but Thomas Green moved with the same careful patience he had always brought to important rooms. One hand held his cane. The other held Harold's envelope. The microphone picked up the soft tap of his shoes against the stage floor, and for reasons I cannot fully explain, that small sound gave me more courage than any applause could have. Vanessa stepped forward before he reached me. "Thomas," she said, her voice light but strained, "this is a family moment. Perhaps any legal matters can wait until after the program." Thomas looked at her over the top of his wire-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Whittaker, this is a company ceremony, not a family dinner. The distinction matters." A murmur passed through the room. Vanessa's face did not change much, but the skin near her jaw tightened. Daniel stood fully now, one hand on the back of his chair. "Mom," he said, keeping his voice low even though the microphone carried enough of it for the front tables to hear. "Please do not do this in front of everyone." I looked at him, and for a moment the stage lights blurred his face into the boy I used to know. He had once been so afraid of disappointing me that he cried when he brought home a C in 7th grade math. I had sat with him at the kitchen table for 2 hours, not scolding, just helping him work through fractions until his breathing slowed. That boy had trusted my patience. This man had mistaken it for weakness. "I am not doing anything to you, Daniel," I said. "I am telling the truth in the room where the lie was presented." Thomas placed the envelope on the podium beside the name tag and my unused speech. He opened it with steady hands and removed the pages. I did not need to read them again. Their meaning had already settled into me. But the room needed more than meaning. It needed record. Thomas adjusted the microphone slightly toward himself. "My name is Thomas Green," he said. "I served as corporate counsel for Whittaker Freight Solutions during its formation and as personal attorney to Harold Whittaker until his passing." Several people turned toward Daniel. A board member near the front leaned back slowly, his expression sharpening. Thomas continued. 8 months before his death, Harold executed a founder protection amendment related to the public and corporate recognition of Margaret Whittaker's founding contribution, her advisory rights, and her protected voting interest. The words sounded formal, almost cold, but I watched them land. Protected voting interest. Founding contribution. Advisory rights. These were not the words Vanessa had used for me. These were words with weight. Vanessa gave a controlled laugh. "I am sure this is all very sentimental, Thomas, but tonight is not the appropriate setting for old personal paperwork." Thomas turned one page. "This document is neither sentimental nor merely personal. It is part of the company's governing record. The review copy was delivered to the board office 9 days ago." I saw Daniel's head move sharply. 9 days ago?" he said. Thomas looked at him. "Yes. To the Office of Executive Administration." Daniel's eyes shifted to Vanessa. It lasted only a second, but everyone close enough to see understood. Vanessa had known something was coming. Perhaps not all of it. Perhaps she had seen the envelope, the notice, the thread of a truth she thought could be buried beneath lighting, music, and a cruel joke printed on cardstock. Her expression smoothed quickly, but not before Lindsay Parker, Carl Benton, and half the front table saw the crack. Thomas read only the necessary portion, because he was too decent to turn the moment into theater. The language stated that any official company function presenting the history, legacy, or founding narrative of Whittaker Freight Solutions must not knowingly omit or diminish Margaret Whittaker's material role in the founding, operations, early financing, administrative management, or survival of the company. It also stated that any deliberate public misrepresentation could trigger a temporary governance review and freeze pending image, title, and legacy-related changes until the matter was addressed by the board. The ballroom was silent enough that I heard someone set down a water glass. Daniel looked at the stage floor. Vanessa looked at the audience, probably searching for a friendly face, but friendly faces are harder to find when witnesses realize they have been used. I took the microphone back from Thomas. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. For many years, I believed being known by my family was enough. I believed Daniel knew. I believed Harold's employees knew. I believed the people who mattered remembered. And many of them did. I looked toward Carl. His eyes were wet, but he kept his chin lifted. But memory can be pushed out of a room if the wrong people control the doors. I turned slightly and looked at the big screen where Harold's photograph still glowed above us. Harold protected me in a way I did not ask for because he saw something I did not want to see. He saw that after he was gone, some people might confuse my quiet with absence. I paused. I did not look at Vanessa when I said some people. I did not have to. Daniel moved toward the stage steps, but a board member reached out and touched his sleeve, not stopping him forcefully, just reminding him that the room was watching. Daniel stayed where he was. "Mom," he said again, softer now. I shook my head once. "Not yet." Then I faced the audience. The first company account was opened with $5,000 from our joint savings. The first truck payment was made after I sold my mother's diamond ring. The first office lease was approved because I signed as guarantor when the bank would not accept Harold a loan. Our first 6 months of payroll were managed by me from a kitchen table while Daniel did homework 10 feet away. These are not memories. They are records. Thomas lifted the supporting documents slightly, and I could see several board members exchange looks. Vanessa's face had lost its careful warmth. She was still beautiful, still polished, but polish has little value when the surface underneath begins to show. I picked up the name tag from the podium. I held it where the audience could see it. Tonight, I was introduced to this room as an old woman who thinks she built this place. My fingers tightened around the card, but my voice remained even. I did not build it alone. Harold did not build it alone. Daniel inherited more than a company. He inherited the work of people who trusted us, drivers who missed dinners, dispatchers who stayed late, mechanics who answered calls on weekends, and yes, a wife who did far more than make coffee. A sound moved through the room then. Not applause. Not yet. Something deeper. Recognition. People looking at one another and realizing the story had changed because the full version had finally been spoken aloud. I placed the name tag back down, face up. I will not ask anyone here to feel sorry for me. I am 68 years old, and I have lived long enough to know that pity is often just respect standing too far away. What I am asking for is accuracy. Accuracy in the company record. Accuracy in tonight's program. Accuracy in the legacy my husband left behind. Thomas stepped forward again and stated that, under the amendment, I had the right to request an immediate board acknowledgement before the ceremony continued. The board chair, a tall woman named Evelyn Ross whom I had met only once, rose from her seat. Her voice was firm. On behalf of the board, Mrs. Whittaker, we will enter the amendment into tonight's record and suspend the remaining legacy presentation pending review. Vanessa turned toward Daniel, whispering urgently, but Daniel did not answer her. He was looking at me now, really looking, perhaps for the first time in years. I expected anger. I expected embarrassment. Instead, I saw something worse for him and quieter for me. He was remembering. I could see it happening. The garage. The kitchen table. The late nights. The woman he had allowed to be turned into a joke. The applause began from the back of the room. One pair of hands, then another. Carl stood first. Lindsay followed. Then several of the older employees rose, then the younger ones who had only just learned what they had never been told. I did not smile. Not because I was ungrateful, but because this moment was not a victory in the simple way people like to imagine. It was the correction of a wound that should never have been made. Vanessa remained by the stage steps, motionless, while the room stood around her. I looked at Daniel one last time before leaving the microphone on the podium. He opened his mouth, but no words came. That was all right. Silence had spoken for him all evening. Now it was speaking to him. The applause did not end all at once. It faded in uneven waves, as if people were not sure whether sitting down too quickly would make them part of the wrong side of the evening. I stepped back from the podium and let the sound pass over me without reaching for it. Applause can be a strange thing. When it comes late, after years of being unseen, it does not fill the empty places the way people imagine. It only lights them for a moment, showing you how long they have been empty. Thomas gathered the papers with the same care he had used to present them, then placed them back into the envelope. Evelyn Ross, the board chair, walked toward the stage with two other board members behind her. Vanessa moved first, intercepting them near the steps with her practiced hostess smile returning in pieces. Evelyn, she said quietly, this has clearly become emotional. Perhaps we should pause and discuss it privately before alarming our guests. Evelyn did not smile back. Vanessa, I believe the guests became involved the moment an official program turned a founding shareholder into a joke. Vanessa's face went still. It was the first time all evening someone in authority had named what she had done without wrapping it in politeness. Daniel stood beside the front table, one hand resting on the chair in front of him as though he needed the furniture to remind him where he was. I could see the conflict moving across his face. Not just embarrassment. Calculation. Regret. Fear of investors, perhaps. Fear of the board. Maybe even fear of me, though not in the way a son should fear his mother. He feared that I had become visible. Evelyn turned toward the room and took the microphone from the stand. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. In light of the documentation presented tonight, the board will be making a brief statement. This evening's remaining legacy presentation will be postponed. We will issue a corrected historical acknowledgement of Whitaker Freight Solutions founding contributors, including Mrs. Margaret Whitaker, and we will conduct an internal review of how tonight's materials were prepared and approved. The words were measured, corporate, careful. But careful words can still carry consequences. At the front table, Vanessa's hands closed around her small silver clutch. Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her, the way people do when they realize the person beside them has led them somewhere they did not mean to stand. She whispered something to him. He did not answer. That silence was different from the one he had given me earlier. This one was not abandonment. It was recognition arriving too late to be useful. Evelyn continued, this company's history belongs to everyone who helped build it, especially those whose work was done before there were cameras in the room. Carl Benton stood again, not applauding this time, just standing with his shoulders squared. One by one, several older employees stood with him. Mechanics. Dispatchers. Office staff. People whose names were never printed on banners. Lindsay Parker stood too, and then younger employees followed, not fully understanding the old story perhaps, but understanding enough of the present one. I remained near the podium, my hand resting lightly beside the name tag I had left there. Vanessa noticed it. Her eyes fixed on the little card as if it were the most dangerous object in the room. The truth is often small before it becomes unavoidable. A printed joke. A missing photograph. A pause where a son should have spoken. Daniel finally walked toward the stage. The room quieted as he came up the steps. For a moment, I thought he might address the audience. Instead, he stopped a few feet away from me, keeping his voice low. "Mom, I did not know she had printed that." I looked at him. It was the kind of sentence that wants to be accepted as an apology without doing the work of becoming one. "Did you know I was missing from the video?" I asked. His eyes moved away. "Did you know I was not listed in the program?" He said nothing. "Did you hear her call my memories domestic?" His throat tightened. "Mom, tonight got out of hand." "No, Daniel," I said softly. "Tonight got honest." That was all. Vanessa stepped onto the stage then, unable to stay away from a conversation she could no longer control. "Margaret," she said, her voice low and sharp beneath the cover of a smile. "You are humiliating your son in front of his entire company." I turned toward her. I did not bring humiliation into this ballroom. I only stopped carrying it alone. Her eyes flashed, but she caught herself before the mask slipped completely. "You are making this sound intentional." I picked up the name tag from the podium and held it between us. "Was this accidental?" She looked at Daniel, then at Evelyn, then at the room beyond the stage. No one rescued her. That was when I saw how fragile her power had always been. It depended on people looking away at the right moments. It depended on Daniel choosing comfort over courage. It depended on me being too polite to name the injury. Remove those things, and all that remained was a woman standing under warm stage lights with her own cruelty in print. Thomas stepped beside me. "For the record," he said calmly, "I will need to retain that item as part of the review materials." I handed it to him. Vanessa made a small sound, almost a laugh, almost disbelief. "A name tag? You are going to build a governance issue around a name tag?" Thomas placed it in the envelope with Harold's amendment. "Not around a name tag, Mrs. Whitaker. Around a pattern." The word pattern moved through me with the steady click of memory. Vanessa seating me near kitchen doors at Daniel's award dinner. Vanessa forgetting to tell me about the company picnic until the day after. Vanessa introducing me as Harold's widow, never as Daniel's mother, never as anyone with a first name unless she wanted to soften an insult. Daniel allowing each small erasure because correcting it would have made his life inconvenient. A pattern. Such a simple word for years of being moved to the edge of my own family. Evelyn asked Thomas to join the board briefly in the side conference room. She also asked Daniel to come. Then she looked at Vanessa. "Mrs. Whitaker, given your role in preparing tonight's materials, we will ask you to provide the planning records and vendor communications by Monday morning." Vanessa's lips parted. "Monday?" Evelyn's expression did not change. "Monday morning." Daniel descended the stage without looking back at his wife. Vanessa followed him 2 steps, then stopped because he did not wait for her. That, more than anything, seemed to shake her. Not the board. Not the witnesses. Not me. It was Daniel walking away from her version of the story for the first time that evening. I stepped down from the stage more slowly. Carl was waiting near the bottom. He did not hug me, though I think he wanted to. Instead, he held out his hand the way he used to greet Harold after a hard delivery had been completed. I took it. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, voice rough, "I should have said more years ago." "We all should have." I squeezed his hand once. "We were all trying to keep peace, Carl. Peace is expensive when only one person pays for it." His eyes lowered, and I knew he understood. Across the room, guests were speaking in hushed tones. Some looked at me with pity, some with respect, some with the discomfort people feel when they realize they laughed before they understood the joke. I did not need to correct them. Shame has its own teacher. Lindsay approached and asked if I needed anything. Water, a chair, someone to walk me out. I thanked her and said I only needed a few minutes. The big screen had gone dark now, Harold's photograph replaced by a blank blue glow. I stood beneath it and looked at the room that had tried to turn me into a footnote. Nothing dramatic had exploded. No one had shouted. The chandeliers still shone, the candles still burned, the hydrangeas still sat perfectly arranged in their glass bowls. Yet everything had changed because the truth had been spoken in complete sentences. Near the conference room door, Daniel stopped and looked back at me. For the first time that night, he looked less like a chief executive officer and more like a son who had misplaced something he was not sure he could recover. I did not go to him. There would be time later for whatever apology he was brave enough to make. Or there would not. I had spent too many years walking toward people who stood still. So I turned away first. Thomas held the conference room door open for the board, and inside that room, the official record of the company began changing without music, without candles, without Vanessa's permission. I sat back down at my side table, lifted my untouched glass of water, and took a slow drink. It was room temperature now, but it felt clean going down. For the first time all evening, I could breathe without feeling the weight of someone else's version of me pinned to my chest. The board meeting behind the conference room doors lasted 23 minutes. I know because I watched the second hand of the ballroom clock move in slow circles above the service entrance, and because there are moments in life when time stops being an idea and becomes something you can hear. Around me, the ceremony had dissolved into careful conversation. Some guests left quietly. Others stayed, pretending to finish dessert while listening for news. The waiters cleared plates with the gentle efficiency of people trained not to notice discomfort. Vanessa remained near the front of the room, alone for the first time all evening. Without Daniel beside her, without a microphone, without a group of admirers arranged around her, she looked smaller. Still elegant, still composed, but smaller in the way a stage set looks when the lights come up and you can see the seams. She did not approach me. I did not approach her. That silence was not avoidance. It was balance. For years she had stepped into every space before I could, answered questions meant for me, turned my memories into quaint little stories, and translated my presence into something harmless. Now there was space between us, and for once she could not fill it with her voice. When the conference room doors opened, Thomas came out first, followed by Evelyn Ross, the board members, and Daniel. My son looked as though he had aged during those 23 minutes. His tie was loosened slightly, and his face held the pale, stunned expression of a man who had believed control was the same thing as leadership until control slipped from his hands in public. Evelyn walked to the stage and asked the remaining guests for their attention. Her statement was brief. The board had acknowledged the Founder Protection Amendment. My role would be added to the company's official history immediately. A corrected anniversary record would be released to employees and partners within 10 business days. Pending legacy branding decisions would be paused until review. Vanessa's planning authority over company public events would be suspended while vendor communications and internal approvals were examined. Daniel would remain Chief Executive Officer, but the board would appoint a temporary governance advisor to oversee the review. No shouting. No dramatic punishment. Just consequences spoken in a steady voice. That is often how real power sounds when it finally enters the room. Vanessa stood perfectly still through the statement. When Evelyn said her planning authority was suspended, her chin lifted slightly, as if pride could hold her upright when nothing else would. Daniel did not look at her. He looked at me. This time, I did not turn away. After Evelyn finished, the room stayed quiet until Carl began clapping. Lindsay joined him. Then others followed, softer than before, less like celebration and more like acknowledgement. I accepted it with a nod. I did not need the room to love me. I needed it to stop participating in my erasure. When the applause faded, Daniel crossed the ballroom toward me. He stopped beside my table, leaving a respectful distance between us that had not existed when he thought I would simply endure whatever was handed to me. "Mom," he said, and his voice broke slightly on that one word. "I am sorry." I have heard many apologies in my life. Some arrive dressed as excuses. Some arrive too quickly, hoping to close the door before the pain can speak. Daniel's apology stood there unfinished, frightened of itself. That made it more honest than most. I looked at his face, at Harold's jawline, at my own eyes, at the boy and the man occupying the same body. "What are you sorry for?" I asked. He swallowed. "For the tag. For the video. For letting Vanessa handle things I should have handled." He paused. "For knowing you were being pushed aside and telling myself it was easier not to make a scene." There it was. Not the whole truth, perhaps, but the first clean piece of it. I folded my hands in my lap. Peace built on your mother's silence is not peace, Daniel. It is convenience. His eyes filled, but he did not look away. "I know. I wish Harold were here," he said. I felt that sentence move through me. "So do I replied. "But if your father had been here, you would not have needed to become the kind of man who corrects this without him." Daniel lowered his head. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Vanessa watched from across the room, her arms held close to her sides. She looked angry, but beneath the anger was something more fragile. She had expected me to want revenge, because that was a language she understood. She did not know what to do with a woman who wanted the record corrected, the workers honored, and the truth placed where it belonged. I stood then, slowly, and took the unused speech from the podium where it still rested beside the microphone. I unfolded it, looked at the 300 careful words I had written for Harold, and realized I no longer needed to read them. The room had already heard what mattered. Instead, I asked Evelyn for the microphone one last time. "I promise this will be brief," I said, and a few tired smiles moved through the tables. I looked at the employees first, old and young. Harold believed a company should take care of the people who carried it through hard seasons. Beginning next month, I will use my founder distributions to establish the Harold and Margaret Whitaker Employee Fund, for emergency grants, trade certifications, and scholarships for employees' children. Carl covered his mouth with one hand. Lindsay's eyes widened. Daniel looked at me as if he had forgotten that I could still make decisions without asking him. I continued. "This is not charity. It is memory in action. It is what Harold would have wanted, and what I should have insisted on sooner." Then I placed the microphone down. I did not look at Vanessa when I walked past her, but she spoke anyway. "Margaret," she said quietly. I stopped. Her smile was gone. Without it, her face seemed almost tired. "You have made everyone think I am some kind of villain." I turned to her. "No, Vanessa. I said what happened. What people think of you now belongs to them." She had no answer for that. Outside the hotel, the Ohio night was cool against my face. The city lights reflected on the damp pavement, and somewhere down the block a car horn sounded, ordinary and distant. Thomas walked with me to the curb while the doorman called a cab. "You handled that well," he said. I looked down at the folded speech in my hand. "I handled it late." Thomas shook his head. "Late is not the same as never." The cab arrived, and before I got in, Daniel came through the revolving doors. He did not run. He did not call out dramatically. He simply stood there, uncertain, like a man learning that love could no longer be summoned on command. "Mom, may I come see you tomorrow?" he asked. I looked at him for a long moment. "Tomorrow is Sunday," I said. "I make coffee at 8. If you come as my son, not as a chief executive officer looking for forgiveness to tidy up a problem." He nodded, tears finally slipping down his face. "Yes, ma'am." That small answer nearly broke me, because it sounded like the boy he used to be. I got into the cab before my own tears could become part of the evening's record. As we pulled away from the Grand Hartwell Hotel, I looked back once. Through the glass doors, I could see the ballroom lights glowing above the people still gathered inside. For 25 years, I had believed dignity meant staying quiet enough not to embarrass the people I loved. That night, I learned dignity sometimes means speaking so clearly that no one can mistake your silence for permission again. I went home alone, but not erased. Harold's brooch rested at my collar, my name was returning to the company record, and for the first time in a long time, the story being told about my life finally sounded like mine.